If you build and run Bullseye, you'll notice that you currently can't move the slider. Now, if you recall, this is because when we first set up the slider, we set it up to a constant value of 50. This is a good time to look at a useful Xcode feature. It allows you to find out more about just about anything in code that has a name. While holding down the Option key, move the cursor over the text constant in this line right here. So you'll see that this constant changes color, and there's also the cursor changes to a question mark. So still while having Option held down, click on constant here, and you'll see a pop-up window will appear with more details about constant. So you can see here that it says, creates a binding with an immutable value. Now this may sound like meaningless technobabble to you now, but the words binding and immutable should be hints that state has something to do with it. Let's dive a little bit deeper into what's going on here. If you've ever gone to a restaurant where the sign or their website says they were open, only to find out that they were actually closed when you tried to enter, you've experienced what happens when the user interface, which is the open sign, doesn't match the state, which is the restaurant was actually closed. This is similar to the example we talked about earlier where your car dashboard was broken, causing you to get a ticket or worse. This kind of problem happens when the user interface and the state aren't connected. In the restaurant example, keeping the open and closed sign in sync with the restaurant actual open or closed state means that someone has to make sure that the sign is always providing the right information. Now, if you've ever worked in the food service industry, you know that the kind of dedication and reliability needed to make sure that the sign is always correct is rare. As we discussed earlier, you may have seen this kind of problem happen in software as well. As your applications grow, their state becomes more complex, and it's all too easy to forget to update some part of your user interface when some state detail changes. Remember, SwiftUI was designed to solve the problem of the mismatch between your user interface and your application state. And one of the ways that SwiftUI provides to help with this is something called bindings. Bindings are a fancy way of saying that a particular user interface view will always be tied to a particular state value. For example, in this video, you're going to learn how to bind the slider view to a state variable that stores the value of the slider. By doing this, every time you move the slider, the state variable will automatically be updated to match. And vice versa, if you update the state variable, the slider will automatically be updated as well. Effectively, they are bound together. Let's see how we can use SwiftUI Bindings to solve the mystery of the slider. First things first, we want to go ahead and get rid of the knock knock joke that we added in for the challenge earlier. That was just a temporary thing. So to delete all this, at the very top, we're going to take that who's there is visible state property and delete it. And then we'll go down here and we'll delete starting from button all the way down to the end parentheses here. We should delete that. And then just make sure the automatic preview updating still works by hitting Option Command P in case it's disabled for you. And it looks like it's still showing up okay, just without the knock knock joke, which is great. Okay, so we're going to need a state variable to keep track of the value of the slider. So it's actually going to be very similar to the way we created this other state property that we created earlier. So @state private var. And then this time we're going to call it slider value : and it's going to be not a double because it is a decimal value that can go from 1 to 100. And the way you do a decimal value in Swift is by typing in double and set it equal to an initial value, which is going to be 50.0. All right, so now we have a state variable. So now what we need to do is we need to make a binding to that slider value so that whenever the slider changes, it updates this state variable for us. And the way you convert a state variable to a binding is by putting a $sign before. So we're going to do self.$sign slider value instead of the constant thing that we put in earlier. And we're still going to keep the same range from 1 to 100. All right, so let me go ahead and run this with Command R. And now, check it out, we can move this slider around, which is great. And let me stop it again. Just to test out that this works, I'm going to change the slider value temporarily from 50 to 10 and run it again with Command R. And you can see here now it starts at a different value, which is 10. And let me stop and undo it with Command Z back to what it used to be.